Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining today's webinar, 2026 State Policy Outlook from Clean Air Task Force, NRDC, Conservative Energy Network, and Rewiring America. I'm Jeremy Tarr. I'm the U.S. State Policy Director here at Clean Air Task Force. We are a nonprofit organization working globally to catalyze the rapid deployment and development of clean energy. We bring more than 25 years of policy expertise and operate as a pragmatic advocacy group with a presence across the United States and internationally. This is our seventh webinar in total but the first of our 2026 webinar series. In case you missed it, last December, our state policy team presented wins and trends from 2025 and prior webinars in 2024. In prior webinars in 2025, we covered topics like clean electricity standards, fusion energy, low emission industrial policy, and some others. Really excited to have the panel that we have for you today. 2025 was a significant year for climate and energy policy, including at the state level. A number of notable events happened. We've started seeing rollbacks on federal environmental rules, cuts to federal funding from the IRA and bipartisan infrastructure law, though preserving some incentives. We have seen subsequent cancellations of clean energy infrastructure projects, a rise in affordability concerns, and the rise in data center and load growth. Each of these organizations on the dais today, we anticipate 2026 being another very consequential year for energy and climate. I'm thrilled to be joined today by leaders in state policy from three vital organizations doing thoughtful work in states around the country. We each have different areas of interest and expertise and focus, so I'm sure you'll find today's presentation and discussion really valuable and interesting. I'd like to introduce our speakers now. We have Kristen Eberhardt, who is the VP of External Affairs at Rewiring America. Prior to joining Rewiring, Kristen led the climate program at the Niskanen Center. John Zoka is the Chief Executive Officer at Conservative Energy Network. He's a longtime advocate for clean energy, having served for 10 years in the North Carolina House of Representatives. Thank you for being here, Kristen and John. And Julie Cerqueira is the Chief Program Officer at NRDC. She served in 3 Democratic and Republican administrations, most recently as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy. A few housekeeping items before we get started in earnest. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website and emailed to you afterwards. We'll also email you today's slides. I believe it'll also be available on YouTube for anyone to access. We also welcome your questions, and we're going to have a Q&A portion at the end. If you have a question that you would like to ask, please submit it using the Q&A function. We'll then see the question in writing, and we'll make sure to get to it, time permitting, at the end. All right, so I'll start with the Clean Air Task Force kind of overview of the 2026 outlook and state policy, and then we'll pass it to my colleagues in other organizations. All right, next slide, please. Next. At CATF, we organize our state work into regions. So I lead our state policy team. We have excellent folks leading our work in each of the regions that you see on the deck here, on the slide here, and where there are white circles, those are the states where we have a priority focus. As we move forward in 2026, we really think of our state policy work falling into 4 buckets. The first is near and long-term emission reductions. There's a need to achieve reductions in both scales of time, and the sub-bullets give some of the work that we're doing on those respects. Second, we're focused on innovative technology deployment and scaling proven technologies. So in the power sector, this means technologies like renewables, nuclear, geothermal fusion, gas with CCS, transmission, etc. Our siting and permitting work also fits under this bucket. Third, we want to see policy progress across political contexts. That's why we work in blue, purple, and red state environments. We think passing innovative policies in each of them are really important. And fourth, we're focused on defending existing critical policies and fighting off harmful new policies that threaten state rights and authorities, as well as existing good environmental and climate and energy laws that we have in place. Next. So the next slides, I'm going to share four kind of big picture trends that we're seeing in 2026 that we think of as real opportunities. The first is on load growth and affordability. We've all heard plenty about load growth in various conferences and conversations. I think, for here, I'll just a couple high-level points. There's going to be significant near-term growth in electricity demand because of data centers and electrification and other drivers. Data centers should cover the cost of their own energy demands. We don't want to see costs for generation, transmission, and system upgrades falling onto ratepayers. We do think there's a real opportunity to meet this demand increase with clean, innovative technologies in addition to existing resources, especially given that many hyperscalers are willing to pay a premium for deployment. We see states taking various approaches to manage data centers and load growth. These raise not just energy issues, but also water, economic development, workforce. There's all kinds of issues that governors and legislators are considering as they address load growth. Affordability, huge issue in 2025. We saw this in New Jersey and Virginia governor elections. It'll be a major issue in 2026. I think it's something that for energy and climate folks, we really need to proactively address, not deal with it if and when it comes up. It will come up. We need to be thoughtful on the front end about how we address it. Second is we're seeing increasing attention to clean, firm power. Clean, firm power is dispatchable, low-emission electricity generation sources that don't rely on the weather. They generate clean power on demand for effectively an indefinite period of time. So examples would be nuclear fission, fusion, geothermal, and the others that you can see here. Benefits of clean, firm power include their reliability to deliver clean electricity whenever needed. They can reduce the infrastructure build out needed because they are energy dense resources. So you can have fewer of them to meet the same energy needs. Modeling consistently shows that in power sector decarbonization scenarios, clean, firm technologies are present. And we think that they can also increase the speed of decarbonization by minimizing risks through attributes like having relatively low land use requirements. They can complement renewables and storage. They lead to more diverse clean energy portfolios, which have a number of benefits. The link here, and you can search it or click the slides when you see them, is to a report recently released by Clean Air Task Force that explains the what, why, and how of clean, firm technologies. Third, we see a big trend in 2026 on the nuclear renaissance that really has started the past couple of years. 2025, we saw significant momentum. In 2026, we are already seeing more examples include Illinois fully repealing its moratorium late last fall, before November, December timeframe. Governor Pritzker just released an executive order in the past few weeks. New York has taken a number of steps on nuclear energy, including setting a 5 gigawatt procurement target, including in its energy master plan a section and specific identification of nuclear as a key technology. In Virginia, there's a bill moving forward to allow hyperscalers access to nuclear. We're seeing repowering of various nuclear units. You may have heard of NASIA's First Mover Initiative, which is all about bringing together states to build order books. At Clean Air Task Force, we are really focused on order books One of the main challenges that comes up with nuclear is cost. And so order books help address this. Order books are when you have firm commitments to build multiple units of the same reactor design, and then you can sequence the build out of those reactors over time, which spreads out the first mover costs and gives really positive signals to supply chains, to economic development, to workforce, and other things, so that you can have a predictable and smooth build out of, say, a dozen or more units. Order books can also be paired with federal cost overrun protection. So when you have both of these mechanisms in place, you've lowered the cost of deployment and you've protected against everyone's concern about kind of runaway costs that would fall on ratepayers. So federal cost overrun protection covers that second risk. Fourth, transmission work is, we see increasingly of interest in multiple states. Our work on transmission falls in three buckets. The first is on transmission public financing. When state uses public financing and ownership models, it can really reduce ratepayer costs of transmission build out. We worked with a partner, did really significant work analysis on this for California in 2024. Last fall, California passed a landmark enabling legislation for financing and public financing and ownership models. We're seeing a lot of other states interested in the same. This helps address the affordability concern that I mentioned earlier. Our second line of work is on transmission siting authorities. State siting agencies can be dedicated to siting and financing new transmission lines, and having that central point of contact in state government has all kinds of benefits. It can help speed implementation, help speed financing. It can be kind of a coordinator to help connect dots of players and resources needed. It can be a central point of communication from the state to other states, because these are regional issues, and to the federal government, on and on. So New Mexico and Colorado already have state siting authorities. We're seeing additional states looking really seriously at developing their own. The third is on community benefits models. We've done really good analysis that identifies different ways that community benefits can flow into communities. And so you can read there, and we have a good report that sort of releases those, and we think goes into those different models, which can be really helpful for transmission projects as they're built out. And then the fifth and final one I'll mention is the 2026 elections. There's 36 governor elections that are going to happen, thousands of state legislators. We have really important federal House and Senate races. A number of utilities commissions have elected commissioners. And so, this is important not just for 2027, because new folks will be in place, but also for 2026. With all this electoral activity, you can see it slowing down policy work in legislatures, even in governor's offices leading up to elections, because of kind of diverted attention, but also maybe cautiousness. With legislatures, we may see sort of broken up sessions because of primaries and then the elections that are going to happen in the fall. On the other hand, you might see final policy pushes with termed out electeds that want to just get the thing over the line before they're out of office. And then after the elections, we could see a real surge in policies during a lame duck session. So I'll stop there, and I'm thrilled to pass it over to John Zoka, who's going to talk through. We're going to go ahead and go to the CEN slides, and then we'll turn it over to John.
Thanks for that, Jeremy. As soon as my slides show up. I want to start off, next slide, just to let people know who we are and what we do, and then I'll go into what we're going to do this year. First of all, our mission is very clear: to champion secure, reliable, affordable, clean American energy. We don't do that in a vacuum. We do it with the goals of the ones you see on your screen. And that really does match with, I think, not only Republicans are saying in Congress, but also Democrats. I think that these goals are things that everyone can truly want to reach. All right, next slide. Because conservative is in our name, and that's our main talker audience, although we talk to everybody because we're 501c3 and nonpartisan, but these are underlying principles that we believe should be contained in policies, both at the national level, the state level, the local level, to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And you can read those for yourself right there. Um, I just want to highlight one in particular, defend property rights. One of the arguments we often hear from both sides of the aisle is, I love all energy, but I really like my energy more than your energy. You know, we've seen the pendulum swing back and forth on that, and that really comes down to property rights on what you can put on your land. We believe that if you own land and you want to put solar, put solar. It's not your neighbor's uh, right to say you can't do what you want with your land. And likewise, that does apply to corporations as well, that if a corporation's building a nuclear power plant, that if they own the land and they're doing it within the existing laws and regulations, that they can do that. Next slide. Here's a map of the lower 48 and where we operate. Um, in the Southeast, we're known as Conservatives for Clean Energy. In Texas, it's Conservative Texans for Energy Innovation. In the Mountain West, it's the Western Way. And in the upper Midwest, the solid colors, they represent the conservative energy forums. That is where CEN started. And even though they're all part of CEN, they are identified by their names, like Ohio as the Ohio Conservative Energy Forum. The slashed lines there are where we have Land and Liberty Coalition. It's a project of CEN. The next slide. And this is what Land and Liberty Coalition is. It's a coalition not only of our employees in the Land and Liberty Coalition, but farmers and ranchers and stakeholders and people who are just interested in getting steel in the ground. And you can see some of the impact that we've had since 2019, over 10 gigawatts of renewable energy built and operational. And right now, I mean, this slide's a little outdated by about 4 or 5 months. Instead of 41,000 megawatts or 41 gigawatts of active projects we're working on, that number is now over 50,000 gigawatts, where we work in partnership with developers to educate the population, to educate county commissioners, educate zoning planning boards about the benefits they'll get from it, and just to tell them the truth and dispel misinformation and disinformation. Next slide, please. All right, so policy priorities for 2026. There's 5 of them. I'm going to zip through them real quick here so I remain within time. Siting and permitting reform and predictability. Most states identify local permitting and land use conflict as a recurring bottleneck for establishing new energy. Our teams are building tools such as siting guides, ordinance tracking, decommissioning frameworks that we can pass on and educate people, while at the same time, while we're pursuing statewide reforms that are politically viable. Each state is unique. Some states have statewide siting, some leave it up to municipalities. Just to highlight a couple of things some of our states are doing. Iowa, for example, their top priority this year is statewide siting standards. They have both a House bill and a Senate bill that they're working through, and they've paired that with a stakeholder convergence process. Many of our land and liberty states, we've already written and developed best practice ordinance guides for them. In fact, Michigan, in their Utilities Commission, it's mandatory reading requirement for them so that they know what the best things to do within the state are. All right, next slide. Highlighting grid reliability and infrastructure modernization. You know, reliability, it's the buzzword of the day. It seems it shows up in nearly every plan. What we're seeing is we talk about reliability, and it's paired with the increasingly long lead times for infrastructure and a rapid load growth. And states are approaching this through different ways, through transmission modernization, distribution reforming, planning reforms, IRP, PSC engagement, and some demand side pilots in some of the states. A couple examples of things that are going great here is in Texas, and I saw my Texas team is listening, so shout out. to Matt and Jaden. Texas is launching the Texans for Affordable Transmission, meaning competitive transmission, ROFR reform focus, grid enhancing technologies, and improved modeling. Um, we have other things going on in other states as well, but that's just one example. Next slide. Affordability and ratepayer protection. Affordability and who pays is a prominent and recurring 2026 theme. States are addressing cost recovery, large load cost allocation, consumer choice, and transparency in procurement and planning. And this theme, as Jeremy mentioned, is increasingly tied to data centers, and not only data centers, but large industrial demand. Uh, as more industry reshores and industry expands here, that's another large, and to date, if I'm not wrong, that's been the largest increase in demand, followed by data centers that are quickly catching up. So some examples of what's going on in states. Georgia is advancing a large customer, air quotes, fair share framework in a Senate bill. And they're also tracking transparency and tax policies for high-use facilities. South Carolina is tracking a number of data center related bills that include requirements for service, reporting, and responsibility standards. So let me just say here, I've highlighted some of our states, but all of our state teams are made up of people who are experts. Many have been working in politics and in energy for a long time. They know the decision makers, they have them in their cell phone, they can call up, but each state is different in how they're attacking all these problems. And it's important for each state to have the flexibility to work on the problems within their state while remaining within the overall framework that we're trying to achieve as an organization. Next slide, please. You know, I really should have labeled this clean, firm, and advanced energy enablement rather than just nuclear, because clean, firm, again, as Jerry talked, that's moved from really optional to central issues across multiple regions as reliability and economic competitiveness pillar. And these plans emphasize enabling policy frameworks, workforce, and sustained education and convening. This is one of the maybe one of the more difficult things to talk about when people are calcified in their positions against one form of energy or another. You know, they like all the above, but they like theirs, and everybody else can go to the end of the line. We don't believe in that. We truly believe in an all the above. So some examples of what's going on here. South Carolina is prioritizing nuclear education tied to advanced reactors, and they've also shown a renewed interest in the VC summer restart. Minnesota, they're working on repealing their nuclear moratorium, and they're now seeing nuclear as a part of reliability planning. And geothermal, in particular, in Texas in the Southwest, is gaining steam, pun intended, as a major form of energy to supply electrons to the grid. And last slide, candidate and elected official education. As a 501c3, our job is to educate candidates and elected officials. And how do we do that? We do that through pollings, convenings, specific candidate education for all of our states. We are in the process of publishing candidate education books that has probably 80% of it just describes what each type of energy is, its advantages, its disadvantages, and then within each state, because they're organized differently, they each have a section there to talk about state peculiar and particular uh, things that they want to talk about. So we're right now distributing these candidate briefing books. We're having a series of roundtables. We believe that once, like in North Carolina and Texas, the primaries are over, whoever got elected in both parties, it's time to begin the education process for them. So we are beginning that. And I have run out of my time, which coincides with that being my last slide. So I'll pass it back to Jeremy.
Thanks, John. All right, we're going to go to Julie at NRDC, and then we'll over to Kristen. I think we've resolved some technical issues on our end. So over to you, Julie.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. And Jeremy, thanks for that terrific introduction. I wanted to take a step back before I focus on what NRDC is doing to just think about how the landscape is changing sort of at the big picture level. So from our perspective, to address climate change, we really need to transform our energy economy. So we're talking about the massive deployment of clean energy generation, expansion of transmission and distribution, electrifying vehicles, buildings, scaling up emerging technologies. And we need to do that at a pace that is unprecedented, both in terms of its speed as well as its scale. When we're looking at the generation need and the grid expansion, we need to basically expand capacity as well as the grid 3 to 4 folds over the next 10 to 20 years. It's a pretty substantial increase compared to what historically we've been able to do. And as a big environmental group, we're also cognizant that for the past 50 years, we've largely focused on how we can block the most harmful projects while creating an enabling environment for projects that we see as being beneficial. But to get to our climate goals, we need to far more aggressively accelerate the implementation and deployment of these beneficial projects. And so where we're seeing this impetus for building more intersect with the issues that, your regular person actually cares about is around affordability. And this is something, Jeremy, that you are touching on at the beginning. The growing demand from data centers is adding pressure to a system that has already been strained. And so if we just look at some of the data, and you can go to the first slide, please. By 2028, US data centers are expected to consume between 320 and 580 terawatt hours annually. And so to put that in perspective, that is more electricity than consumed by California, New York, and Illinois collectively in 2023. You can see on this map where some of that planned build is going to be. We're expecting that power bills could increase by as much as 8% nationally and as high as 25% in some regions by 2030. And there's a lot of attempts now by the administration, by tech companies, by governors to make the tech companies actually pay their fair share. And so we'll need to see how those efforts play out. When you look at energy growth in this map, just highlighting a couple of things. In 2025, the US added about 55 gigawatts of new capacity, which is the highest since 2002. Keep in mind that 90% of that was solar, wind, and storage. And over the coming year, we see that industry is planning on building 86 gigawatts of new capacity. We expect 93% of that to be solar, wind, and storage. Just 7% of that will be gas. And so part of that is driven by the fact that you've got massive demand coming in from the data centers. You have companies that are racing to take advantage of the existing tax incentives. And then in addition to that, at the end of the day, renewables with storage are still the cheapest to deploy. They are the fastest to deploy. And so they're still making some progress in the market. Of course, it's going to change over the medium term as some of these incentives are phased out, but that is very technology specific. And we can talk more about that if there's time. Next slide. And so just thinking about the role of an environmental group, so NRDC is a large environmental advocacy group. And so we are actually focused on 3 primary goals. And so we're trying to solve the triple planetary crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, and environmental health while keeping equity and environmental justice at the core of our work. We've historically worked in blue trifecta states. So our origin story really is around New York and California, the big blue states, very ambitious policies. We've got a strong foothold there. But as we've seen from the fight with bill and IRA, so with bill, bipartisan legislation, IRA passed along party lines. And IRA, despite the significant benefits that were accrued to communities in Republican states, still was annihilated by the administration, almost overnight, despite companies asking to keep it, despite Republican politicians asking to protect it. And so I think the major lesson for us has been that if we want to have durable wins, we need to have more bipartisan solutions. And so our approach as we look forward is to focus on two things. In what ways can we drive the most impact on the issues that people care about? And then two, how is it that we can actually rebuild power federally? States are key to that. So our work is centered around these four pillars. The first is just having people-centered policies. And so what are the policies and the issues that people actually care about? They care about their energy and their water bills. They care about toxics in their water. They care about air pollution, making their kids sick. And we need to communicate with people in a way that they receive information, which is increasingly through social media and through influencers, and much less so through legacy media, which is the way in which many environmental nonprofits tend to communicate. The second is that we need to broaden the outcome-based partnerships. And so rather than always working with the same kind of group of environmental partners, really thinking about partners on the ground, whether that's industry, agricultural communities, where we have shared goals, but we have different levers of influence, different people that we engage, different types of policy solutions, and working towards what is the outcome that we want to achieve, even if we may have different views on the specific policy solutions to get there. Third, states are the laboratories of democracy. They are moving the market, they can foster replication and scaling up. Oftentimes you see elected leaders that have aspirations for higher office. And so if they're able to champion an issue in their state, as they move up the ranks, they bring those ideas with them and end up getting federal wins. And so we really see states, regardless of who is in the White House, continuing to be an important part of how we drive durable change. And then finally, accountability. And so our C4 arm in particular does a lot of accountability, especially when we have companies or elected leaders that are not voting in the way that we want them to, that are not taking actions that we think are consistent with our values. And so really thinking about when is it that we need to provide some flexibility because folks are meeting us halfway to where we need to get to, but not necessarily penalizing folks because they don't vote exactly the way that we want. Next slide. And so for us as an organization, we work across a number of states in the country, as you see here from this map. The blue states are where we have teams who are actually on the ground. Those are our priority states. And the yellow states are opportunity states where we have local leaders or partners, communities who ask for our assistance. And so we're in an advisory role or we're running maybe a single issue bill. One of the things that makes NRDC such a powerful voice and influencer in the work that we do is we have tremendous technical expertise. So we've got, policy expertise, economics, science. We have a large litigation team, and so we're able to provide advice to communities and partners and to sue to enforce the laws that currently exist. We have teams that are very politically savvy and work very closely with governors and state legislators. And then we also work with our E2 business network in order to advocate for climate and clean energy policies. When I think about the things that are highest priority to us, and without wanting to go into too much detail, because I think, Jeremy, John, you've covered some of the things that I probably would have flagged for NRDC, I could bucket them in four ways. The first is what you're hearing around ratepayers, rising costs, just getting more renewable deployment, right? And so we've been working with governors across the country to pull together a package of policy solutions that aim to steady or bring down people's energy bills. And so things like, data centers bringing their own clean energy. We want to right size the return on equity that utilities bring, in particular because we see is that it's creating a perverse demand for utilities to overinvest in capital expenditure and then charging that to consumers. And of course, accelerating beneficial electrification in vehicles and buildings is going to be essential to shaving off those kind of peak hours. Other ways in which we're working on this renewable energy side is through transmission. And so we have a goal of doubling the capacity of the transmission power system, really trying to integrate 2 terawatts of clean energy. What does that actually look like on the ground? So some of the work that we do is working with states and also with regions on integrated resource plans. We have a number of campaigns with states like New York and New Jersey that is looking at how do we actually build a backbone for the offshore wind industry to take off, despite some of the attacks from the administration. And then, of course, fighting new gas infrastructure projects. We're also very much focused on permitting and deployment. And so we're involved in negotiations at the federal level, but also working with states. That takes form in things like proposing common sense reforms to CEQA while making sure that we're defending sort of the desire to clean up the most recent bill. We work in states like Pennsylvania on statewide permitting and siting legislation that is aiming to streamline the local approving process for permitting. And then one of my favorite projects that we have is called Powering Your Community. And here we're working in communities in Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania in partnership with the union. And so we work with IBEW. Together, we're providing analysis. IBEW is coming and showing up at these public hearings in order to advocate for clean energy projects. They are trusted leaders in the community. They are the people who are going to work on these projects, bringing those economic benefits to local communities. And we have seen that in the cases and the hearings where we've intervened as part of this partnership, more than 83% of those projects have been approved. And so it's a remarkable success rate. In addition to that, I would say the second big tranche of work, similar to what you've heard here, is just focus around how we reduce the impacts of data centers on load growth. And so especially pushing on large load tariffs. Jeremy, you had talked a little bit about these sort of at the beginning, but just to put a finer point on it, these tariffs will oftentimes feature like a minimum monthly demand charge. So for example, 80% of contracted capacity needs to be paid on a monthly basis. They have longer term commitments of 10 to 15-year timeframes. The companies are required to pay for the upgrading of the grid, and so you don't have consumers that are absorbing those costs. And then there's collateral requirements to mitigate the risks of stranded assets, especially as these companies are trying to figure out how they're going to make these data centers and the increase in AI something where they can secure a profit from. We also do a lot of modeling and analysis in order to engage in PUC proceedings to make sure that clean energy is part of the solution for meeting the demand from data centers. The third bucket is around holding the oil and gas industry accountable. And here we are advancing these climate superfund laws called Make Polluter Pay bills. And part of the goal from here is to ensure that these oil and gas companies who are responsible for climate damages in communities, that they are paying into the system in order to support investments into resilience, into adaptation in those communities. And then finally, just wanted to focus a little bit on industrial decarbonization because we haven't talked about it as much. Here we're looking at a big push for new procurement standards, setting embodied carbon targets, and then promoting direct incentives for the industry. And so we just had a recent win about 1 or 2 weeks ago in New Mexico, where 3 bills were passed that provide incentives to the industry that are going to start to decarbonize things like steel and cement. So it was great progress. For the sake of time, let me stop there, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. Over to you, Kristen.
Okay, thank you. So, as has been, a theme here, 2025 really was the year that affordability became the topic in energy, and that is going to continue into 2026. And a lot of the reason is that households are really feeling the effects, energy costs rising. Um, so, Rewiring America is a nonprofit, and next slide, is a nonprofit focused particularly on how electrification can help. So here we see how that the people's pocketbook is really feeling this from in just the last 5 years. They have seen their bills increase, but electrification can really bring those bills down. Next slide. So we are focused on how do we help bring this about for us? And the reason that electrification such a big impact on bills is that just running these household machines through electricity is just so much more efficient than burning gas to run them. And as Julie touched on, one of the big reasons that energy a big topic is data centers. The data centers are popping up everywhere around the country, and it's putting pressure on the grids and on prices. Um, so what our research has found is that a lot of that demand from data centers could actually be met by households. So yesterday we heard, the White House announced a pledge asking data centers to, provide their own power to mitigate this effect customer prices. But that is a partial or very flawed solution. It could really result in building out new gas, overinvestment in privately owned and polluting resources, and starving public purpose and household programs. Our data shows that instead, new data centers could meet most of their um, new energy needs by investing in household level solar storage, heat pumps, heat pump water heaters. So this is just showing how much more efficient electricity is than gas. Next slide. And this is all the data centers popping up. Next slide. And here's, that we have shown that they could meet more of demand through households. Next slide. Okay, so it's really at an equivalent cost to building a new gas plant. Data centers could be investing directly in house. So everywhere around the country, what we have found is that, next slide, is that some combination of home solar storage, cooling space heating, water heating upgrades to meet new data center demand. So the data center demand is the outline purple circle, and then the other household upgrades are orange and green. So basically, we're seeing that the orange, green, and purple upgrades can outpace the data center almost every state where the data centers. Okay, so we have been seeing a lot of potential for state level policies that use this moment of growing demand and growing household and politicians' concern about energy prices to really direct some investment towards households and towards electrification that can decarbonize the residential sector. So we're looking at a couple of buckets of how to improve this: affordability, treating households as grid assets, and then just capturing the system value of these upgrades so that the benefits accrue to everyone connected to the grid, not just to the households that have themselves done the upgrade. So I'm just gonna, I know we're running tight on time, but I'm just gonna go through a couple of examples of these the types of policies that we see really gaining momentum in 2026. So one is electrification friendly rate reforms. So default rates are usually flat. That discourages households from using what in most states should be very cheap electricity in the winter. So that results in unfairly high bills for households that are using electric heat, and it's wasting the grid infrastructure during the winter when there's not as much throughput. So electrification friendly rates can actually increase that demand in the winter, bringing down bills for households and also increasing the grid utilization, which puts downward pressure on rates for everyone else. So there's a couple examples of this happening already. New York, Massachusetts, new heat pump rates have already passed and are already bringing down costs. Another policy that's gaining momentum is grid optimization, sometimes known as non-wires alternatives. The idea just that we should make the best use of the infrastructure we already have rather than using ratepayer money to build out new infrastructure. So an example of this is in Virginia. The state legislature passed HB 434, which directs the State Corporation Commission to establish grid utilization metrics and then require the utilities to increase their grid utilization over time. And I know a couple of these that Julie and John already mentioned, so I'll just mention one more, which is soft reform. So this is a very politically durable lever because it's about cutting red tape, so reducing permitting delays, simplifying interconnection, standardizing process. Often at the local level is where, when we're talking about households, where these permitting problems come into play. So, examples in 2027, New Jersey enacted legislation establishing a statewide solar permitting platform to make it easier and faster to get solar residential rooftop permits. And in California, a bill was introduced that it didn't pass. It was introduced that would streamline permitting and remote inspection pathways for residential heat pump water heaters and HVAC. So basically making use of our digital technology to speed up these processes and reduce costs. And I will just mention one more. So virtual power plants that has been a big buzzword and is really moving from pilot territory into actually being a serious consideration in planning discussions. So states are still trying to figure out how to accredit distributed capacity, how to compensate, how to like which market players to allow. So just one example, Virginia has required Dominion Energy to propose a VPP pilot and to then begin developing a permanent program. So, yes, still in pilot and with a requirement in the existing bill, but that move into a permanent and bigger part of Dominion's energy planning. And so we are seeing a lot of momentum and hoping that this way of thinking that how can be energy infrastructure. We don't just have to build out new resources, new transmission, new distribution, all of which is costly. We are going to have to do that. But in addition to that, we can look to our existing households and existing infrastructure, making more of that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. I'll invite our panelists to come back onto the screen so we can start our Q&A. We already have some folks, people who have asked questions, both when you registered for the event and that have come in live today. So thank you for those. If you have additional questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. So the first one, what strategies, messages are you using to counter the argument that decarbonization is driving the energy crisis? Let's maybe John and Julie, do y'all want to start with answers?
Sure, I'll start. To some on this call, it might seem rather odd, but CEN doesn't really talk about carbon very much. We can decarbonize without talking about it, because what we do in talking to conservatives, there are definite trigger words. I mean, carbon is one of them. We do have the was it Carbon Caucus in Congress made up of Republicans who believe in it, but it's easier to talk for us about what makes a grid stronger, more resilient. How do you get the electrons? The same solution set, which when people talk about decarbonization, is the same solution set we talk about without talking about decarbonization. And it might seem funny, but when I talk to folks, usually my closing argument is Texas. And I ask them, do they think Texas is a conservative state? And everybody says, no matter what their political affiliation, they say yes. And I ask them if they know what ERCOT is. They say, yeah. They say, they provide electricity to over 21 million people. And they say, yeah. And then I pull up on my phone the ERCOT alert app. ERCOT has several of these. And for people who prefer higher carbon solutions like coal and older natural gas plants, I point out, because on this, it shows what the mix is every 15 minutes, because ERCOT is probably the freest market in electricity in the country. They reprice and bring electrons onto the grid every 15 minutes. Right now, in the last 15 minutes, solar's about 20 gigawatts, wind's a little over 7, nuke is 5, natural gas is a little bit higher today. It's a little over 21, and coal's at 6. So basically, when you add up the cleaner technologies, and there's 50 megawatts of battery. When you add all that up, You've got over 51% of the energy coming on the grid right now is clean, renewable. I mean, there's no fuel to solar, there's no fuel to wind. Batteries are, the energy comes stored there, and nuclear, most people consider it clean. So that does relate to lower carbon, but you don't have to talk about carbon to lead people to a solution that leads you to a lower carbon environment. Julie, I'll pass that to you.
Great. And so the way that I would think about it is, I think in three ways. Basically, all of the above, we've been doing that, and that hasn't been working. So the first is around bills, right? So residential power bills have gone up about 40% since 2021. That's faster than inflation. It's faster than grocery bills. And what voters are thinking is that AI and data centers, utilities, that they are raking in profits hand over fist at the cost of consumers. And so I think that's point one. The second is that clean energy is just the cheapest. I mean, that's the data, right? We see that 90% of deployment is largely from renewables. They're the fastest to deploy, it's the most affordable. And despite the Trump administration trying to undermine clean energy projects here in the United States, globally, clean energy is being deployed at 5 times the rate of fossil fuels. And it's because the economics of clean power makes sense. The third point is that if you want real energy dominance, it's about clean energy. So renewable generation and transmission produces about 3.5 million jobs. When you compare that to numbers in the fossil fuel industry, it's substantially higher. And then you're growing parts of the local economy because it's not a global market. I think the final point that I would make is not how we usually talk about it, but just thinking about the past, month or so. The other thing, and we used to say this at the Department of Energy a lot, our reliance on fossil fuels is a national security risk. Because what we're seeing is that the oil and gas industry and prices, it's a global energy market. And so there's a lot of volatility there, especially when you have these geopolitical crises. And so you don't have that with solar and wind. Nobody's going to come and take your solar and wind away. And so if we really actually want to be dominant, to have energy security, it's about having more homegrown energy that is indigenous to local communities. So that's how I would respond.
All right, let's go to the next question. I think, Kristen, this is probably for you. You talked about electrification and heat pumps. Is there a concern that when you put people, homes more dependent on electricity, now that leads to more electricity demand, so you have to build more generation, which drives up cost, and also you're exposing ratepayers to price fluctuations with electricity. So how do you think about those issues?
Yeah, so when we talk about household electrification, there's kind of a bundle of things that we're talking. Some of those include solar, storage, and EVs, and all of those can either be, net benefit to the grid or net benefit in terms of, batteries and EVs, if managed properly, can really decrease peaks. So those are all kind of clear winners. We're also talking about heat pump water heaters, which sometimes can be fuel switching off of gas, which then does add some net load. But water heaters also tend to be fairly flexible. And so again, if managed correctly, those can be a net benefit because you can actually shave your peak by managing when the water heater is heating up the water. And then the final class is the HVAC, so your heat pump that can do heating and cooling. And those are generally a net benefit in the summer because usually a new heat pump is going to be more efficient than your existing AC, which was already running on electricity. You're actually going to decrease the electricity use in the summer a bit. But the real place that this problem could come into play is winter heating. If you're fuel switching, you had a gas heater and now you're using a heat pump heater, then that's new electric load that you didn't have because before it was gas. And this can be a problem in certain cases, but right now the majority of states are still summer peaking or dual peaking, meaning that they actually have room on the grid in the winter. So there is room that will change over time. But for the few places that are the winter peaking. It's a consideration, but there's yeah, again, the majority of places, even the heat pump itself is going to be no problem. And then when you bundle it with the other home electrification things, the net impact becomes neutral or positive.
The next question, I'll take this one. How can we accelerate more nuclear energy? So I kind of addressed this in my slides. I would say, order books, you get price discount in bulk, and then the federal government can have a role in with financial support through loans, through cost overrun protections, et cetera. In addition, what we're seeing is states doing important policy action that moves nuclear forward. So removal of moratoria. I mentioned Illinois. I think John mentioned Minnesota, work going on there. At CATF, we support clean electricity standards, which are technology neutral, requirements to have more clean energy over time. Those drive nuclear energy. Valuing nuclear energy's benefits to the grid in terms of reliability and stability beyond LCOE can help better value the attributes that nuclear provides to the whole system, as opposed to ignoring those and just looking at LCOE. We're seeing states do incentives on workforce training, state funds like in Texas, the Nuclear Energy Fund, $350 million last year to incentivize nuclear. And then states can play a valuable role in kind of being a connector point between developers, workforce, supply chain, and other types of activities that are needed to advance nuclear energy. So wide range of things. Let's see. We're 2 minutes to the end. I think we have a number of questions. We're not going to be able to get to them, unfortunately. I think we're going to probably wrap it up there. And I'll just mention a couple of things. Thank you so much to my co-panelists for joining us on this event. I think very interesting to hear each of our organizations working on some things that are the same, but many things that are different. We all have our role in this ecosystem. We will follow up with you with the email that includes a link to the video, slides. We may include some additional resources that were mentioned here by the various presenters, so those are at everyone's fingertips. And be on the lookout for announcement about CATF's second state policy webinar in this year's series. Again, thank you for attending. Appreciate all the panelists. Have a great rest of your day.